Hello and welcome to this chess opening video. So I hope you have a happy Halloween. And for Halloween, I didn't dress up, of course, but I have an orange board here, which I don't normally use. And today I will go over the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So for those of you who have never heard of this, it is a variation in the Vienna game. So as the board is set up here, this is the beginning of the Frankenstein-Dracula variation in the Vienna game. But let's go back to the beginning and see how this position is reached. So after e4 with white, we have e5 and then knight to c3. This is the Vienna game. So it's a little bit different than some of the other e4 e5 openings. Normally the knight on f3, the knight will be played to f3 normally. So the Vienna game is a little bit different, where you bring out this pawn, you bring out this knight to protect the pawn on e4. So how often is this played? Let's take a look. e4, e5. So knight to c3 is actually the second most played move here. But it's only played 14,000 times versus 349,000. So the Vienna game could be a surprise opening that your opponent might not be used to seeing. So that might be a reason to play this. So now we have knight to f6. This is the Falkbeer variation in the Vienna game. And how often is that played? Well, that's the number one move. So normally you'll see this move, which puts pressure on the pawn, maybe with an idea of bringing the pawn out to d5 and helping attack here. Also, it gets you closer to castling. So the next move here is bishop to c4, and this is the Stanley variation in the Falkbeer variation of the Vienna game. So, all these variations, they can be a little bit confusing. But if we look at this, this is the second most played move, bishop to c4. Number one is g3, with the idea of probably fianchettoing the bishop here and going that route. So, either is good. But we see there's only a few thousand examples of this opening already. So this could be something you would want to play to surprise an opponent. Maybe they don't see this as often. All right. So bishop to c4. We have good developing moves by white. After the knight moves, white will be ready to castle. So what does black normally do here? Well, the number one move is just a normal move like knight to c6. But the number two move is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So number one would be just bringing your knight here, normal developing move, and that would be the Max Lang defense in the Vienna game. But today we have the Frankenstein-Dracula variation, which is this capture right here of the pawn, giving up this knight. But what is normally played here? Now, it looks like you could just capture the knight, but then the opponent might just press this pawn forward, forking the bishop and the knight. So instead of that, the number one move is queen to h5. So we'll look at a couple different variations in this Frankenstein-Dracula variation. Also, it looks like bishop capturing on f7 is sometimes played with check, preventing the king from castling. Then you can go after the knight. But let's look at the most played move. Usually the most played move is played most often because it's generally the best. And in this queen to h5 move, it looks like white wins 37% of the time, a higher draw percentage, 30%, and 32% black wins. So let's take a look at this. Queen to h5 in the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So what does this move do? Well, it threatens an immediate checkmate here with the queen capturing and being backed up by the bishop here. This move threatens an immediate mate. So what is played most often here? Interesting response by black, and that is to take care of two problems at once. So the knight is under attack and not protected here. So this knight will drop back to here, attacking the bishop and protecting the threat of mate here, protecting against that threat. So let's go here. Knight to d6. So you take care of two problems at once, which is usually a good move if you can have that move take care of multiple problems or give you multiple advantages. That would be even better. But there is a problem. It blocks in this pawn here, which blocks in the bishop. So let's see how white normally continues here. Well, the bishop is under attack. So the number one move is to just drop back here. And then we have bishop to e7 being played most often. And now black is ready to castle. So white develops here, pushing the knight forward, and white is ready to castle. So normally the game continues with knight to c6, and then knight captures a pawn here instead of castling immediately. And then now we have a renewed threat here. So, the pawn could try and capture, the bishop could try and capture the pawn. If the knight captures, then the queen could capture and deliver a mate here. So, some tricky stuff. And now we have g6 being played, blocking the attack of the queen, threatening the queen. So here, instead of just running to e2, which is the second most played move, which keeps an eye on the knight, instead we have the number one move. And look at white's winning percentage. It's gone down to 10%, and here black usually wins. So this Frankenstein-Dracula variation apparently can get quite tricky pretty fast. So normally this is played attacking the queen, which is trapped here. So capturing away from the center to keep all the pawns together, and not capturing with the b pawn towards the center, creating more pawn islands and an isolated weak pawn on a7. So the queen is still under attack. So now we have queen to f3 being played most often, castling, the king is safe now, and d3 being played to let this other bishop out. And here normally knight to f5 being played. And now white does not win any of these games. Apparently it's 50-50 here. Now we are down to very few examples, so you have to take that into account as well. So white normally castles here. Then we have knight to d4, forking the queen and the bishop. So queen to d1. And instead of capturing the bishop immediately, it looks like a5 is played, gaining space. And now bishop to e3. I don't know. I wouldn't recommend that move. Well, I guess if this pawn tries to push forward, you do have a knight and a bishop covering this, so the bishop would not be trapped here. All right, so normally we have bishop to f5 just developing, rook to e1. And remember, a good sign that an opening worked for you or that you came out okay in an opening is if your rooks end up on good squares. And by that I mean a square like this on E1, where this rook is fighting for the open file. So you want your rooks to end up on open files, half open files, or behind pawns that you plan to push forward. So now we have bishop to f6, queen gets off the back rank, connecting the rooks, and rook to e8, fighting for the open file. So next we normally have capture, capture, and then some exchanges here. And then once again, a fight for the open file. So capture, queen captures, and then, just a lot of trades here, it looks like. After the queen captures, bishop captures, and black did go on to win this, maybe because he has a bishop pair, which is usually a little bit stronger, and the board is pretty open here. So knight to e4, more captures, and now this pawn is under attack, so the bishop captures the pawn and just goes ahead in material. All right, so that's one example of how this Frankenstein-Dracula, now this is the Frankenstein-Dracula declined Alekhine variation. So a lot of variations, you may want to try this Frankenstein-Dracula variation and just see how it goes. It looks like it would probably surprise your opponents because there weren't as many examples, only a few thousand. So if we go back to the beginning here and see how we came about to this Frankenstein-Dracula variation of the Vienna game. So once again, after e4 and e5, we have the second most played move, which drops you down from almost 350,000 examples all the way down to just under 15,000 after knight to c3. So now you could probably throw your opponent off and surprise them with this move, but remember, it could also transpose into other openings. The most common move is knight to f6, and then let's see, after g3, that was a Falkbeer-Mises variation, but we're looking for being able to go into this Frankenstein-Dracula variation, which is bishop to c4, and then capturing on e4 here. And I believe this Frankenstein-Dracula variation, I'm not positive on this, but I think I remember reading that Tim Harding named this opening after he thought that it seemed like this was such a crazy opening that Dracula and the mad scientist who made Frankenstein's monster played a game against each other. That's what he imagined, which it is pretty crazy opening. So let's get back to it here. This is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation after this capture here, which is pretty crazy. Now, we looked at queen to h5. So what was that called? That was the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. They're not popping up a name for this move, the bishop capturing here, because the bishop could capture, and then the knight could go ahead and capture here, and the king would be kind of stuck in the middle. So maybe we'll take a look at that. And there's another variation where just an immediate knight to f3 is played. So if we look at this, and well, before I show this move, let's take one more look at the regular line and just make sure there's nothing else of interest there before we move on. So queen to h5, played by far here because it keeps the pressure up. You're threatening an immediate mate right in the opening. And so, if you want to stay, keep from losing, now we have this retreat. And so black is pretty much just ahead here. ahead by a pawn. The bishop is under attack, so that bishop normally retreats. They have queen takes e5 check. That's possible as well. So, that should be something we could take a quick look at. If you capture here, well then the queen normally just blocks. And then after capturing, you're probably forced to do that because if you try to retreat back, I guess, well, you can't even go here and protect this bishop because you'll be pinned by their queen. So that's why they capture here. But that does just help your opponent develop another bishop. And now you have to retreat here with your bishop because you're under attack. So, normally this retreat is made, although white wins a little more often with this move, bishop to e2. So, I don't know, we could take a look at that. And then, what do they recommend? Knight to f5, okay, because then maybe you could drop down here and attack the bishop. It prevents you from putting this pawn on d4, and it allows you to move this pawn and develop your bishop here, wherever you decide to develop it. All right, so knight to f3 is normally played, then c6, preventing the knight from moving forward, getting ready to push to d5, and then g4 is played most often. But anyway, that's another example. I'll try and, I don't want to go too deep into these different lines. You can try these out on your own. So if we go back some, let's see, go back to the beginning. So once again, after e4, e5, knight to c3 is the Vienna game. And then what do we have here? This knight to f6 move is played most often. And then bishop to c4. And after capturing here, this is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So we looked at some of these queen to h5 moves. So I'll move on here and look at the second most played move, but it's only played 31 times. So this is not played as often because capture with check, so the king captures, and then you can take this knight. So material is even, but what are the differences here? Well, white has one central pawn and black has two, so that's an advantage to black. But black cannot castle, although maybe he can get this bishop out. Where would you put this bishop? Maybe here to limit the scope of the knight, prevent a check, try and bring your rook out and get your king into safety. But would you have time to do that? There's a possibility of a check with the queen. So it looks like d5 is played most often. And now, what could be played here? Well, the queen could check on f3, and that's been played, but that's the third most common move. And it looks like white wins the most with just a simple retreat. So knight to g3, and now bishop to d6, and white won twice with that. Knight to c6, just developing the knight. And then you can either play d3 to slow down these pawns if they decide to move forward in the future, or queen checks. So white won half of the games with that, so it's like a 50-50. Most often d3 is played first. So then bishop to c5, queen to h5 check, g6 blocks, queen to h6. Interesting decision there. And, well, what does this move do? Well, it looks like it prevents the rook from just moving to this half open file or even to the center here because the queen could just capture the pawn with a check. So now we have knight to d4 with the threat of a fork here. So queen to d2 prevents that. And now queen to f6 developing here. So after c3, chasing the knight drops back, and it attacks our knight, but that's ignored in favor of developing and getting ready to castle. Interesting. Knight to h4 was played, and black won this after capture, queen captures, castle, rook to f8, grabbing the half open file, queen to e2, bishop to d6, repositioning, protecting this attacked pawn, and then we have bishop to e3, bishop to d7. The rooks are connected, and next, what? Queen to d2. So perhaps getting ready to attack the queen with this bishop-queen battery. So king goes into the corner trying to get some safety, and the rook on the edge moves towards the center. So c6, fortifying the center. c4, that is ignored, and queen to e7 was played. And then the rooks maybe get ready to double on the c file. So queen to f7. Anyway, it looked like, I think black went on to win here. So another example of how this Frankenstein-Dracula variation can go. So, back to the beginning. We'll go through this again. e4, e5, knight to c3, the Vienna game. So knight to f6, the most played move, and then after bishop to c4, once again capturing here is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So what else is normally played here? Knight to f3. We can take a quick look at that, and then I want to take a look at the knight capturing black's knight here in the center. But first, knight to f3. And then, once again, this possibility of capturing here, capturing away from the center, which allows this bishop to develop. Now, normally you want to capture towards the center, but you don't want to blindly follow general chess principles because there are other factors to consider. So here, this allows the bishop to develop quickly. It keeps all your pawns together, because if you would have captured this way, well, then you would have a weak, isolated pawn possibly here, which could be a problem in the end game. It could be a weakness that your opponent could target. But now all the pawns stay together and they're more easily able to protect each other. So here, most often played is this move, apparently. Okay. Well, interesting possibility. Here, white normally castles. So we'll take a look at that. But before I do, I just want to double check and see. Sometimes there's an opening where you can capture here. But if you try to capture, the queen could move here, pinning the knight to the king. So normally after e4, e5, knight to f3, f6, there's another opening where you can capture, but it doesn't look like it would work here. So normally white just captures, and then d6 is played, fortifying the center, getting ready to develop this bishop, maybe pinning the knight to the queen. So most often played is this move, preventing that bishop from pinning. and a threat of moving the queen up here with check. And if this pawn tries to block, the knight can capture. And if this pawn captures, the queen can pick off the rook. So something to consider. I know that was a lot of arrows there, but this is a common theme that you could keep an eye on, maybe use it in some of your games, where if you're able to attack with a queen and have a knight somewhere where it can hit this square, if they block, the queen could maybe pick off the rook here. So to prevent all that, g6 is played, and then f4, attacking the center. That's ignored in favor of developing the queen. And then f5, gaining space, attacking here. So queen to g7, lining up on our king. And now queen to d3, helping defend the pawn. So if it's captured, and then the knight can capture, and if the bishop captures, we have plenty of coverage on this pawn here. So g5 is normally played, attacking the knight, so the knight retreats. Bishop to e7. So just normal developing moves. White is ahead in development here. And now in this game, b4 was played, just gaining space here. a6. Bishop drops back in case b5 can attack the bishop if it stayed on c4. And now h5. So doesn't look like black will castle on the king side as he's throwing his pawns forward. So knight to d2. Maybe worried about a g4 pawn attack on the knight. So black develops, perhaps getting ready to castle queen side. So knight to e4. Okay. Queen to h7, piling up on this pawn, and rook to f2. And instead of capturing here, and having a battery, looks like queen to h6 was played. Anyway, I'm not going to go too much further. We'll go over some maybe other variations if you decide to play this Frankenstein-Dracula variation. Let me cover a couple more things here before I wrap the video up. So the Vienna game is this position here with knight to c3, the second most played move in this position, or excuse me, in the earlier position, knight to c3 is the second most played move after knight to f3. So here, most common is this move, bishop to c4, and once again, the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So I wanted to take a look at an immediate capture here. Well, that allows this move, forking these two pieces. So most played is to give up the bishop pair and capture, but perhaps this move is good as well, because if they capture your knight, then you can recapture the pawn, keep material even. It looks like white won 50% of their games, but it was only 4 games by developing here, because then you're threatening to capture this pawn with check. But most played was bishop captures. Well, then after queen captures, queen to f3, bishop to e6, backing up the queen in case this knight decides to move and have a discovered attack on the queen. But then they could capture our queen. So Knight to c3 is usually played, then an exchange of queens, but the knight jumps forward, attacking the pawn, so it's protected, and now castling, and then f6, fortifying the central pawn, d4 attacks, that's usually captured, and then the knight jumps forward, adding more pressure to this. So after castling, excuse me. All right. So anyway, this is one way the game could go. I'll play it out a little bit further, just adding more pressure to the pawn. Bishop helps guard the pawn. And now bishop to f4, taking this diagonal, aiming at this c7 pawn with the knight. And now rook protects, and knight to d2. Maybe getting ready to jump up, maybe here on b3, and then attack the bishop and the pawn here. So a6 is normally played, getting rid of this knight, and instead of that, usually a counterattack is played. So knight to e4. If they capture your knight, you can take the bishop and attack their other bishop. So after bishop retreat, knight to a3, bishop to f5, attacking our knight, rook defends, but pressure is added here, so retreat and an exchange of rooks. All right. Oh, the bishop was under attack here, so retreat, getting ready to try and chase the bishop. This would keep the material even on the king side. And then the king moves to the center, which is important as you go into the endgame. Try and use your king. So let's see. Bishop to c5, threatening to capture and break the pawns apart. And that is usually ignored, apparently, with knight to e4. Bishop attacks the rook. And, it's blocked. So after capture, then bishop takes, oh man, interesting. So this is how the game went. And then a capture here, rook up to e7, attacking the pawn. It's defended. And now the king jumps into action here. All right, so interesting game. You know, I'd recommend you try out this Frankenstein-Dracula variation, but your opponent could, you know, kind of veer off course. So, you know, before I go into that, that'll be the final thing I cover. I wanted to look at maybe one other thing. Let's see. Okay, so once again, that is what normally happens. So what if they capture? That's what we just looked at. And then we have a fork. So another possibility is keeping the bishop pair. And after capture, bishop takes. Well, then normally f5 is played. You have other options, but this chases the bishop back. Then you have e4, gaining space in the center and sending this bishop back, retreating. Knight to c6. d3, attacking this center that has been pushed forward. And then, let's see, bishop to d6, just developing. So white does likewise, getting ready to castle. So castling, before white castles, an exchange in the center. And the bishop develops. All right, here's something interesting. in this game, black won. Oh, excuse me, wrong bishop. After capturing, wrecking the pawns over here, king goes to h8 because this rook could grab the half-open file and put pressure on the pawn in front of the king. So c3 prevents the knight from moving forward. Queen to h4. A counterattack over here while black attacks this pawn. And then bishop to f4. Trying to knock out the defender of this pawn and have the rook and the queen pile up. So that's ignored and the king runs to safety. But now... Interesting move here. Look at this. Capturing the pawn. The bishop cannot capture because it's pinned. So capture, capture, and we have a check here. So after the king moves, b6 is played, and black is just ahead here. So queen to d5 attacks, knight to e5, attack on the queen. A block here. So after capture, capture, rook adds pressure to the pawn. So that pawn moves forward. Once again attacking. And rook at a to e8 here. So after capture, the queen gives itself up for the rook pair. So let's look at this. We have equal number of pawns, but two rooks versus the queen. So in the game, a4 was played. This is pretty interesting, so I'll play it out a little bit further. Rook at e to f8, doubling the rooks up, protecting the back rank from any back rank mates. The queen goes over here targeting both of the pawns. And now we have capture, getting ready to double the rooks on the 7th rank here. So the king starts running. Instead of doubling the rooks on the 7th, we have some more pawn exchanges. So, rook to h6. That's interesting. Queen captures. Rook at h to f6. King up to b3. And this pawn starts running here. King up to b5. Maybe getting ready to knock this out. But, that's not likely because the rook is covering. So maybe pushing this pawn forward at some point. But you have to watch out for a check on the king with the rooks. So rook moves back, defending the pawn. Rooks belong behind past pawns. Let me turn on the lights here. Starting to get a little dark. All right. Now queen to e5, rook to g7. Queen blocks the pawn. The rook covers here. b4 is played. Rook to g5 check. King drops back. And then h6, giving the king room. But anyway, this is like a crazy continuation. Black went on to win, probably because of these passed pawns here before white could get a passed pawn moving over here because the rooks are doing a good job of helping cover things. So, after queen to b8, the king just moved forward. Check. And I don't know, that's as far as they have in here. All right, well, I guess I'll wrap the video up there. I'll do one quick review here if you want to see once again how the Frankenstein-Dracula variation appears out of the Vienna game. So e4, e5. The second most played move here is the Vienna game. And then if you want to try the Frankenstein-Dracula variation, usually, let's see. Oh, well, it's black's turn here. They're most likely going to play this, and then you can pick this move, and if they capture, this is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So, it might be hard to get this variation every time, but you could try it out and see what happens if you're able to reach it, and see what you think. So feel free to leave comments and let me know what you think of this Frankenstein-Dracula variation, or any other comments you want to leave. Please like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. So thank you for watching, and have a super Halloween and a super chess day.